Chapter 6 of Bulfinch's The Age of Chivalry. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Age of Chivalry by Thomas Bulfinch. Chapter 6 Sir Gawain. Sir Gawain was nephew to King Arthur by his sister Morgana, married to Lot, king of Orkney, who was by Arthur made king of Norway. Sir Gawain was one of the most famous knights of the Round Table, and is characterized by the romancers as the sage and the courteous Gawain. To this Chaucer alludes in his Squire's Tale, where the strange knight salueth all the court, with so high reverence and observance, as well in speech as in countenance, that Gawain, with his old courtesy, though he were come again out of Faery, ne could him not amenen with a word. Gawain's brothers were Agravain, Gahariet, and Gareth. Sir Gawain's marriage. Once upon a time King Arthur held his court in merry Carlisle, when a damsel came before him and craved a boon. It was for vengeance upon a caitiff knight, who had made her lover captive and despoiled her of her lands. King Arthur commanded him to bring his sword Excalibur, and to saddle his steed, and rode forth without delay to right the lady's wrong. Ere long he reached the castle of the grim baron, and challenged him to the conflict. But the castle stood on magic ground, and the spell was such that no knight could tread thereon, but straight his courage fell and his strength decayed. King Arthur felt the charm, and before a blow was struck, his sturdy limbs lost their strength, and his head grew faint. He was fain to yield himself prisoner to the churlish knight, who refused to release him except upon condition that he should return at the end of a year, and bring a true answer to the question, "What thing is it which women most desire?" or in default thereof surrender himself and his lands. King Arthur accepted the terms, and gave his oath to return at the time appointed. During the year the king rode east, and he rode west, and inquired of all whom he met what thing it is which all women most desire. Some told him riches, some pomp and state, some mirth, some flattery, and some a gallant knight. But in the diversity of answers he could find no sure dependence. The year was well nigh spent, when one day, as he rode thoughtfully through a forest, he saw sitting beneath a tree a lady of such hideous aspect that he turned away his eyes, and when she greeted him in seemly sort, made no answer. "What wight art thou," the lady said, "that will not speak to me? It may chance that I may resolve thy doubts, though I be not fair of aspect." "If thou wilt do so," said King Arthur, "choose what reward thou wilt, thou grim lady, and it shall be given thee." "Swear me this upon thy faith," she said, and Arthur swore it. Then the lady told him the secret, and demanded her reward, which was that the king should find some fair and courtly knight to be her husband. King Arthur hastened to the grim baron's castle, and told him one by one all the answers which he had received from his various advisers, except the last, and not one was admitted as the true one. "Now yield thee, Arthur," the giant said, "for thou hast not paid thy ransom, and thou and thy lands are forfeited to me." Then King Arthur said, "Yet hold thy hand, thou proud baron, I pray thee hold thy hand, and give me leave to speak once more, in rescue of my land. This morn, as I came over moor, I saw a lady set, between an oak and a green holly, all clad in red scarlet. She says all women would have their will, this is their chief desire. Now yield, as thou art a baron true, that I have paid my hire." "It was my sister that told thee this," the churlish baron exclaimed. "Vengeance light on her! I will some time or other do her as ill a turn." King Arthur rode homeward, but not light of heart, for he remembered the promise he was under to the loathly lady, to give her one of his young and gallant knights for a husband. He told his grief to Sir Gawain, his nephew, and he replied, "Be not sad, my lord, for I will marry the loathly lady." King Arthur replied, now nay, good Sir Gawain, my sister's son ye be. The loathly lady's all too grim, and all too foul for thee." But Gawain persisted, and the king at last, with sorrow of heart, consented that Gawain should be his ransom. So one day the king and his knights rode to the forest, met the loathly lady, and brought her to the court. Sir Gawain stood the scoffs and jeers of his companions as best he might, and the marriage was solemnized, but not with the usual festivities. Chaucer tells us, "There was no joy ne fest at all, there n'as but heaviness and mockle sorrow, for privily he wed her on the morrow, and all day after hid him as an owle, so wha him with his wife looked so foul. [Footnote: Nas is not was, contracted, in modern phrase, there was not. Moko sorwa is much sorrow, morwa is morrow.] When night came, and they were alone together, Sir Gawain could not conceal his aversion, and the lady asked him why he sighed so heavily, and turned away his face. He candidly confessed it was on account of three things: her age, her ugliness, and her low degree. The lady, not at all offended, replied with excellent arguments to all his objections. She showed him that with age is discretion, with ugliness security from rivals, and that all gentility depends, not upon the accident of birth, but upon the character of the individual. Sir Gawain made no reply, but turning his eyes on his bride, what was his amazement to perceive that she wore no longer the unseemly aspect that had so distressed him. She then told him that the form she had worn was not her true form, but a disguise imposed upon her by a wicked enchanter, and that she was condemned to wear it until two things should happen: one, that she should obtain some young and gallant knight to be her husband. This having been done, one half of the charm was removed. She was now at liberty to wear her true form for half the time, and she bade him choose whether he would have her fair by day and ugly by night, or the reverse. Sir Gawain would fain have her look her best by night, when he alone would see her, and show her repulsive visage, if at all, to others. But she reminded him how much more pleasant it would be to her to wear her best looks in the throng of knights and ladies by day. Sir Gawain yielded, and gave up his will to hers. This alone was wanting to dissolve the charm. The lovely lady now with joy assured him that she should change no more, but as she now was, so she would remain by night as well as by day. Sweet blushes stained her red cheek, her eyes were black as sloe, the ripening cherry swelled her lip, and all her neck was snow. Sir Gawain kissed that lady fair, lying upon the sheet, and swore as he was a true knight that spice was never so sweet. The dissolution of the charm which had held the lady also released her brother, the grim baron, for he too had been implicated in it. He ceased to be a churlish oppressor, and became a gallant and generous knight as any at Arthur's court. End of chapter 6. Of Bulfinch's The Age of Chivalry. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Age of Chivalry by Thomas Bulfinch. Chapter 7. Kedok Briefbrass, or Kedok with the Shrunken Arm. Kedok was the son of Isen, a beautiful niece of Arthur. He was ignorant who his father was, till it was discovered in the following manner. When the youth was of proper years to receive the honours of knighthood, King Arthur held a grand court for the purpose of knighting him. On this occasion a strange knight presented himself, and challenged the knights of Arthur's court to exchange blow for blow with him. His proposal was this: to lay his neck on a block for any knight to strike, on condition that, if he survived the blow, the knight should submit in turn to the same experiment. Sir Kay, who was usually ready to accept all challenges, pronounced this wholly unreasonable, and declared that he would not accept it for all the wealth in the world. And when the knight offered his sword, with which the operation was to be performed, no person ventured to accept it, till Kedok, growing angry at the disgrace which was thus incurred by the Round Table, threw aside his mantle and took it. "Do you do this as one of the best knights?" said the stranger. "No," he replied, "but as one of the most foolish." The stranger lays his head upon the block, receives a blow which sends it rolling from his shoulders, walks after it, picks it up, replaces it with great success, and says he will return when the court shall be assembled next year, and claim his turn. When the anniversary arrived, both parties were punctual to their engagement. Great entreaties were used by the king and queen, and the whole court, in behalf of Kedok, but the stranger was inflexible. The young knight laid his head upon the block, and more than once desired him to make an end of the business, and not keep him longer in so disagreeable a state of expectation. At last the stranger strikes him gently with the side of his sword, bids him rise, and reveals to him the fact that he is his father, the enchanter Eliaures, and that he gladly owns him for a son, having proved his courage and fidelity to his word. But the favour of enchanters is short-lived and uncertain. Eliaures fell under the influence of a wicked woman, who, to satisfy her pique against Kedok, persuaded the enchanter to fasten on his arm a serpent, which remained there sucking at his flesh and blood, no human skill sufficing either to remove the reptile or to alleviate the torments which Caradoc endured. Caradoc was betrothed to Guimier, a sister to his bosom friend Cador, and daughter to the king of Cornwall. As soon as they were informed of his deplorable condition, they set out for Nantes, where Caradoc's castle was, that Guimier might attend upon him. When Caradoc heard of their coming, his first emotion was that of joy and love; but soon he began to fear that the sight of his emaciated form, and of his sufferings, would disgust Guimier, and this apprehension became so strong that he departed secretly from Nantes, and hid himself in a hermitage. He was sought far and near by the knights of Arthur's court, and Cador made a vow never to desist from the quest till he should have found him. After long wandering, Cador discovered his friend in the hermitage, reduced almost to a skeleton, and apparently near his death. All other means of relief having already been tried in vain, Cador at last prevailed on the enchanter Eliaures to disclose the only method which could avail for his rescue. A maiden must be found, his equal in birth and beauty, and loving him better than herself, so that she would expose herself to the same torment to deliver him. 2 vessels were then to be provided, the one filled with sour wine, and the other with milk. Caradoc must enter the first, so that the wine should reach his neck, and the maiden must get into the other, and, exposing her bosom up to the edge of the vessel, invite the serpent to forsake the withered flesh of his victim for this fresh and inviting food. The vessels were to be placed 3 feet apart, and, as the serpent crossed from one to the other, a knight was to cut him in two. If he failed in his blow, Caradoc would indeed be delivered, but it would be only to see his fair champion suffering the same cruel and hopeless torment. The sequel might be easily foreseen. Guimier willingly exposed herself to the perilous adventure, and Cador, with a lucky blow, killed the serpent. The arm in which Caradoc had suffered so long recovered its strength, but not its shape, in consequence of which he was called Caradoc Briefbras, Caradoc of the shrunken arm. Caradoc and Guimier are the hero and heroine of the ballad of the Boy and the Mantle, which follows. The Boy and the Mantle. In Carlisle dwelt King Arthur, a prince of passing might, and there maintained his table round, beset with many a knight. And there he kept his Christmas, with mirth and princely cheer, when lo, a strange and cunning boy before him did appear. A kirtle and a mantle, this boy had him upon, with brooches, rings, and ouches, full daintily bedone. He had a sash of silk about his middle meat, and thus with seemly courtesy he did King Arthur greet. God speed thee, brave King Arthur, thus feasting in thy bower, and Guenever thy goodly queen, that fair and peerless flower. Ye gallant lords and lordlings, I wish you all take heed, lest what ye deem a blooming rose should prove a cankered weed. Then straightway from his bosom a little wand he drew, and with it eke a mantle of wondrous shape and hue. Now have thou here, King Arthur, have this here of me, and give it unto thy comely queen, all shapen as you see. No wife it shall become that once hath been to blame. Then every knight in Arthur's court sly glanced at his dame. And first came Lady Guenever, the mantle she must try. This dame she was new-fangled, and of a roving eye. When she had taken the mantle, and all with it was clad, from top to toe it shivered down, as though with tears beshred. One while it was too long, another while too short, and wrinkled on her shoulders in most unseemly sort. Now green, now red it seemed, then all of sable hue. Beshrew me, quoth King Arthur, I think thou be'st not true. Down she threw the mantle, no longer would she stay, but storming like a fury to her chamber flung away. She cursed the rascal weaver that had the mantle wrought, and doubly cursed the forward imp who thither had it brought. I had rather live in deserts, beneath the greenwood tree, than here, base king, among thy grooms, the sport of them and thee. Sir Kay called forth his lady, and bade her to come near. Yet, dame, if thou be guilty, I pray thee now forbear. This lady, pertly giggling, with forward step came on, and boldly to the little boy with fearless face is gone. When she had taken the mantle with purpose for to wear, it shrunk up to her shoulder, and left her back all bare. Then every merry knight that was in Arthur's court gibed and laughed and flouted to see that pleasant sport. Down she threw the mantle, no longer bold or gay, but with a face all pale and wan to her chamber slunk away. Then forth came an old knight, a pattering over his creed, and proffered to the little boy 5 nobles to his meed. And all the time of Christmas plum porridge shall be thine, if thou wilt let my lady fair within the mantle shine. A saint his lady seemed, with step demure and slow, and gravely to the mantle with mincing face doth go. When she the same had taken, that was so fine and thin, it shrivelled all about her, and showed her dainty skin. Ah, little did her mincing, or his long prayers bestead, she had no more hung on her than a tassel and a thread. Down she threw the mantle with terror and dismay, and with a face of scarlet to her chamber hied away. Sir Cradock called his lady, and bade her to come near. Come win this mantle, lady, and do me credit here. Come win this mantle, lady, for now it shall be thine, if thou hast never done amiss, since first I made thee mine. The lady, gently blushing, with modest grace came on, and now to try the wondrous charm courageously is gone. When she had ta'en the mantle, and put it on her back, about the hem it seemed to wrinkle and to crack. "Lie still," she cried, "O mantle, and shame me not for naught. I'll freely own whate'er amiss or blameful I have wrought. Once I kissed Sir Cradock beneath the greenwood tree, before I kissed Sir Cradock's mouth, before he married me." When she had thus her shriven, and her worse fault had told, the mantle soon became her, right comely as it should. Most rich and fair of colour, like gold it glittering shone, and much the knights in Arthur's court admired her every one. The ballad goes on to tell of 2 more trials of a similar kind, made by means of a boar's head and a drinking horn, in both of which the result was equally favourable with the first to Sir Cradock and his lady. It then concludes as follows: "Thus boar's head, horn, and mantle were this fair couple's meed, and all such constant lovers, God send them well to speed." Percy's Reliques. End of chapter 7.
Of Chivalry. Chapter 18 from Bulfinch's The Age of Chivalry. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Anders Lankford. The Age of Chivalry by Thomas Bulfinch. Chapter 8. Lancelot of the Lake. King Ban of Brittany, the faithful ally of Arthur, was attacked by his enemy Claudas, and after a long war saw himself reduced to the possession of a single fortress, where he was besieged by his enemy. In this extremity he determined to solicit the assistance of Arthur, and escaped in a dark night with his wife Helen and his infant son Lancelot, leaving his castle in the hands of his seneschal, who immediately surrendered the place to Claudas. The flames of his burning citadel reached the eyes of the unfortunate monarch during his flight, and he expired with grief. The wretched Helen, leaving her child on the brink of a lake, flew to receive the last sighs of her husband, and on returning perceived the little Lancelot in the arms of a nymph, who on the approach of the queen threw herself into the lake with the child. This nymph was Vivienne, mistress of the enchanter Merlin, better known by the name of the Lady of the Lake. Lancelot received his appellation from having been educated at the court of this enchantress, whose palace was situated in the midst not of a real, but, like the appearance which deceives the African traveller, of an imaginary lake, whose deluding resemblance served as a barrier to her residence. Here she dwelt not alone, but in the midst of a numerous retinue, and a splendid court of knights and damsels. The queen, after her double loss, retired to a convent, where she was joined by the widow of Bohort, for this good king had died of grief on hearing of the death of his brother Ban. His 2 sons Lionel and Bohort were rescued by a faithful knight, and arrived in the shape of greyhounds at the palace of the lake, where, having resumed their natural form, they were educated along with their cousin Lancelot. The fairy, when her pupil had attained the age of 18, conveyed him to the court of Arthur, for the purpose of demanding his admission to the honour of knighthood, and at the first appearance of the youthful candidate the graces of his person which were not inferior to his courage and skill in arms, made an instantaneous and indelible impression on the heart of Guinevere, while her charms inspired him with an equally ardent and constant passion. The mutual attachment of these lovers exerted, from that time forth, an influence over the whole history of Arthur. For the sake of Guinevere, Lancelot achieved the conquest of Northumberland, defeated Galahad, king of the Marches, who afterward became his most faithful friend and ally, exposed himself in numberless encounters, and brought hosts of prisoners to the feet of his sovereign. Sir Lancelot. After King Arthur was come from Rome into England, all the knights of the Table Round resorted unto him, and made him many justs and tournaments. And in especial Sir Launcelot of the Lake, in all tournaments and justs and deeds of arms, both for life and death, passed all other knights, and was never overcome, except it were by treason or enchantment. And he increased marvellously in worship, wherefore Queen Guinevere had him in great favour above all other knights. And for certain he loved the queen again above all other ladies, and for her he did many deeds of arms, and saved her from peril through his noble chivalry. Thus Sir Launcelot rested him long with play and game, and then he thought to prove himself in strange adventures, so he bade his nephew Sir Lionel to make him ready. For we too will seek adventures. So they mounted on their horses, armed at all sights, and rode into a forest, and so into a deep plain. And the weather was hot about noon, and Sir Launcelot had great desire to sleep. Then Sir Lionel espied a great apple tree that stood by a hedge, and he said, "Brother, yonder is a fair shadow. There may we rest us and our horses." "It is well said," replied Sir Launcelot. So they there alighted, and Sir Launcelot laid him down and his helm under his head, and soon was asleep passing fast. And Sir Lionel waked while he slept. And presently there came 3 knights, riding as fast as ever they might ride, and there followed them but one knight. And Sir Lionel thought he never saw so great a knight before. So within a while this great knight overtook one of those knights, and smote him so that he fell to the earth. Then he rode to the second knight, and smote him, and so he did to the third knight. Then he alighted down, and bound all the 3 knights fast with their own bridles. When Sir Lionel saw him do thus, he thought to assay him, and made him ready silently not to awake Sir Launcelot, and rode after the strong knight, and bade him turn. And the other smote Sir Lionel so hard that horse and man fell to the earth. And then he alighted down, and bound Sir Lionel, and threw him across his own horse. And so he served them all 4, and rode with them away to his own castle, and when he came there he put them in a deep prison, in which were many more knights in great distress. Now while Sir Launcelot lay under the apple tree sleeping, there came by him 4 queens of great estate, and that the heat should not grieve them, there rode 4 knights about them, and bare a cloth of green silk on 4 spears betwixt them and the sun. And the queens rode on 4 white mules. Thus as they rode they heard by them a great horse grimly neigh. Then they were aware of a sleeping knight that lay all armed under an apple tree, and as the queens looked on his face, they knew it was Sir Launcelot. Then they began to strive for that knight, and each one said she would have him for her love. "We will not strive," said Morgane le Fay, that was King Arthur's sister, "for I will put an enchantment upon him that he shall not wake for 6 hours, and we will take him away to my castle. And then, when he is surely within my hold, I will take the enchantment from him, and then let him choose which of us he will have for his love." So the enchantment was cast upon Sir Launcelot, and then they laid him upon his shield, and bare him so on horseback between 2 knights, and brought him unto the castle, and laid him in a chamber. And at night they sent him his supper. And on the morning came early those 4 queens richly dight, and bade him good morning, and he them again. "Sir knight," they said, "thou must understand thou art our prisoner, and we know thee well, that thou art Sir Launcelot of the Lake, King Ban's son, and that thou art the noblest knight living. And we know well that there can no lady have thy love but one, and that is Queen Guinevere. And now thou shalt lose her forever, and she thee. And therefore it behoveth thee now to choose one of us. I am the Queen Morgane le Fay, and here is the Queen of North Wales, and the Queen of Eastland, and the Queen of the Isles. Now choose one of us which thou wilt have, for if thou choose not, in this prison thou shalt die."
"This is a hard case," said Sir Launcelot, "that either I must die, or else choose one of you. Yet had I liever to die in this prison with worship than to have one of you for my paramour, for ye be false enchantresses."
"Well," said the queens, "is this your answer, that ye will refuse us?"
"Yea, on my life it is," said Sir Launcelot.
Then they departed, making great sorrow. Then at noon came a damsel unto him with his dinner, and asked him, "What cheer?"
"Truly, fair damsel," said Sir Launcelot, "never so ill."
"Sir," said she, "if you will be ruled by me, I will help you out of this distress. If ye will promise me to help my father on Tuesday next, who hath made a tournament betwixt him and the King of North Wales, for last Tuesday my father lost the field."
"Fair maiden," said Sir Launcelot, "tell me what is your father's name, and then will I give you an answer."
"Sir knight," she said, "my father is King Bagdemagus."
"I know him well," said Sir Launcelot, "for a noble king and a good knight, and by the faith of my body I will be ready to do your father and you service at that day."
So she departed, and came on the next morning early, and found him ready, and brought him out of 12 locks, and brought him to his own horse. And lightly he saddled him, and so rode forth. And on the Tuesday next he came to a little wood where the tournaments should be, and there were scaffolds and holds, that lords and ladies might look on and give the prize. And then came into the field the King of North Wales with 80 helms, and King Bagdemagus came with 80 helms. And then they couched their spears, and came together with a great dash. And there were overthrown at the first encounter 12 of King Bagdemagus's party, and 6 of the King of North Wales's party, and King Bagdemagus's party had the worse. With that came Sir Launcelot of the Lake, and thrust in with his spear in the thickest of the press, and he smote down 5 knights ere he held his hand, and he smote down the King of North Wales, and he brake his thigh in that fall. And then the knights of the King of North Wales would just no more, and so the gree was given to King Bagdemagus. And Sir Launcelot rode forth with King Bagdemagus unto his castle, and there he had passing good cheer, both with the king and with his daughter. And on the morn he took his leave, and told the king he would go and seek his brother Sir Lionel that went from him when he slept. So he departed, and by adventure he came to the same forest where he was taken sleeping. And in the highway he met a damsel riding on a white palfrey, and they saluted each other.
"Fair damsel," said Sir Launcelot, "know ye in this country any adventures?"
"Sir knight," said the damsel, "here are adventures near at hand, if thou durst pursue them."
"Why should I not prove adventures?" said Sir Launcelot, "since for that cause came I hither."
"Sir," said she, "hereby dwelleth a knight that will not be overmatched for any man I know, except thou overmatch him. His name is Sir Turquine, and as I understand he is a deadly enemy of King Arthur. And he has in his prison good knights of Arthur's court 80 and more, that he hath won with his own hands."
"Damsel," said Launcelot, "I pray you bring me unto this knight."
So she told him, "Hereby within this mile is his castle, and by it on the left hand is a ford for horses to drink of. And over that ford there groweth a fair tree, and on that tree hang many shields that good knights wielded aforetime, that are now prisoners. And on the tree hangeth a basin of copper and latten, and if thou strike upon that basin thou shalt hear tidings." And Sir Launcelot departed, and rode as the damsel had shown him, and shortly he came to the ford, and the tree where hung the shields and the basin. and among the shields he saw Sir Lionel's and Sir Hector's shields, besides many others of knights that he knew. Then Sir Launcelot struck on the basin with the butt of his spear, and long he did so, but he saw no man. And at length he was ware of a great knight that drove a horse before him. And across the horse there lay an armed knight bounden, and as they came near, Sir Launcelot thought he should know the captive knight. Then Sir Launcelot saw that it was Sir Gaheris, Sir Gawain's brother, a knight of the Table Round.
"Now, fair knight," said Sir Launcelot, "put that wounded knight off the horse, and let him rest a while, and let us two prove our strength. For as it is told me, thou hast done great despite and shame unto knights of the Round Table. Therefore now defend thee." "If thou be of the Table Round," said Sir Turquine, "I defy thee and all thy fellowship." "That is overmuch said," said Sir Launcelot. Then they put their spears in the rests, and came together with their horses as fast as they might run, and each smote the other in the middle of their shields, so that their horses fell under them. And the knights were both staggered, and as soon as they could clear their horses, they drew out their swords, and came together eagerly. And each gave the other many strong strokes, for neither shield nor harness might withstand their strokes. So within a while both had grimly wounds, and bled grievously. Then, at the last, they were breathless both, and stood leaning upon their swords. "Now, fellow," said Sir Turquine, "thou art the stoutest man that ever I met with, and best breathed, and so be it thou be not the knight that I hate above all other knights, the knight that slew my brother, Sir Carados. I will gladly accord with thee, and for thy love I will deliver all the prisoners that I have." "What knight is he that thou hatest so above others?"
"Truly," said Sir Turquine, "his name is Sir Launcelot of the Lake."
"I am Sir Launcelot of the Lake, King Ban's son of Benwick, and very knight of the Table Round. And now I defy thee. Do thy best."
"Ah," said Sir Turquine, "Launcelot, thou art to me the most welcome that ever was knight, for we shall never part till the one of us be dead." And then they hurtled together like two wild bulls, rashing and lashing with their swords and shields, so that sometimes they fell as it were headlong. Thus they fought 2 hours and more, till the ground where they fought was all bepurpled with blood. Then, at the last, Sir Turquine waxed sore faint, and gave somewhat aback, and bare his shield full low for weariness. That spied Sir Launcelot, and leapt then upon him fiercely as a lion, and took him by the beaver of his helmet, and drew him down on his knees, and he raised off his helm, and smote his neck in sunder. And Sir Gaheris, when he saw Sir Turquine slain, said, "Fair lord, I pray you tell me your name, for this day I say ye are the best knight in the world, for ye have slain this day in my sight the mightiest man and the best knight except you that ever I saw."
"Sir, my name is Sir Launcelot du Lac. That ought to help you of right, for King Arthur's sake, and in especial for Sir Gawain's sake, your own dear brother. Now I pray you that ye go into yonder castle, and set free all the prisoners ye find there, for I am sure ye shall find there many knights of the Table Round, and especially my brother Sir Lionel. I pray you greet them all from me, and tell them I bid them take their such stuff as they find, and tell my brother to go unto the court and abide me there, for by the feast of Pentecost I think to be there. But at this time I may not stop, for I have adventures on hand." So he departed, and Sir Gaheris rode into the castle and took the keys from the porter, and hastily opened the prison door and let out all the prisoners. There was Sir Kay, Sir Brandelis, and Sir Galind, Sir Brian and Sir Aliduc, Sir Hector de Maris, and Sir Lionel, and many more. And when they saw Sir Gaheris, they all thanked him, for they thought because he was wounded that he had slain Sir Turquine. "Not so," said Sir Gaheris. "It was Sir Launcelot that slew him, right worshipfully. I saw it with mine eyes." Sir Launcelot rode till at nightfall he came to a fair castle,
And therein he found an old gentlewoman, who lodged him with good will. And there he had good cheer for him and his horse. And when time was, his host brought him to a fair chamber over the gate to his bed. Then Sir Launcelot unarmed him, and set his harness by him, and went to bed, and anon he fell asleep. And soon after there came one on horseback, and knocked at the gate in great haste. And when Sir Launcelot heard this, he arose and looked out of the window, and saw by the moonlight 3 knights riding after that one man, and all 3 lashed on him with their swords. And that one knight turned on them knightly again, and defended himself.
"Truly," said Sir Launcelot, "yonder one knight will I help, for it is shame to see 3 knights on one."
Then he took his harness, and went out at the window by a sheet down to the 4 knights. And he said aloud,
"Turn you knights unto me, and leave your fighting with that knight."
Then the knights left Sir Kay, for it was he they were upon, and turned unto Sir Launcelot, and struck many great strokes at Sir Launcelot, and assailed him on every side. Then Sir Kay addressed him to help Sir Launcelot, but he said,
"Nay, sir, I will none of your help. Let me alone with them."
So Sir Kay suffered him to do his will, and stood one side, and within 6 strokes Sir Launcelot had stricken them down. Then they all cried, "Sir Knight, we yield us unto you."
"As to that," said Sir Launcelot, "I will not take your yielding unto me. If so be ye will yield unto Sir Kay the seneschal, I will save your lives, but else not."
"Fair knight," then they said, "we will do as thou commandest us."
"Then shall ye," said Sir Launcelot. "On Whitsunday next, go unto the court of King Arthur, and there shall ye yield unto Queen Guinevere, and say that Sir Kay sent you thither to be her prisoners."
"Sir," they said, "it shall be done, by the faith of our bodies." And then they swore every knight upon his sword, and so Sir Launcelot suffered them to depart. On the morn Sir Launcelot rose early, and left Sir Kay sleeping. And Sir Launcelot took Sir Kay's armor, and his shield, and armed him, and went to the stable, and took his horse, and so he departed. Then soon after arose Sir Kay, and missed Sir Launcelot, and then he espied that he had taken his armor and his horse.
"Now, by my faith, I know well," said Sir Kay, "that he will grieve some of King Arthur's knights, for they will deem that it is I, and will be bold to meet him. But by cause of his armor, I am sure I shall ride in peace."
Then Sir Kay thanked his host, and departed.
Sir Launcelot rode in a deep forest,
And there he saw 4 knights under an oak, and they were of Arthur's court. There was Sir Sagramore le Desirous, and Hector de Maris, and Sir Gawain, and Sir Uwaine. As they spied Sir Launcelot, they judged by his arms it had been Sir Kay. "Now, by my faith," said Sir Sagramore, "I will prove Sir Kay's might," and got his spear in his hand, and came towards Sir Launcelot. Therewith Sir Launcelot couched his spear against him, and smote Sir Sagramore so sore that horse and man fell both to the earth. Then said Sir Hector, "Now shall ye see what I may do with him." But he fared worse than Sir Sagramore, for Sir Launcelot's spear went through his shoulder, and bare him from his horse to the ground. "By my faith," said Sir Uwaine, "yonder is a strong knight, and I fear he hath slain Sir Kay, and taken his armor." And therewith Sir Uwaine took his spear in hand, and rode towards Sir Launcelot. And Sir Launcelot met him on the plain, and gave him such a buffet that he was staggered, and wist not where he was. "Now see I well," said Sir Gawain, "that I must encounter with that knight." Then he adjusted his shield, and took a good spear in his hand, and Sir Launcelot knew him well. Then they let run their horses with all their mights, and each knight smote the other in the middle of his shield, but Sir Gawain's spear broke, and Sir Launcelot charged so sore upon him that his horse fell over backward. Then Sir Launcelot passed by, smiling with himself, and he said, "Good luck be with him that made this spear, for never came a better into my hand." Then the 4 knights went each to the other, and comforted one another, What say ye to this adventure, said Sir Gawain, that one spear hath felled us all four? I dare lay my head it is Sir Launcelot, said Sir Hector. I know it by his riding. And Sir Launcelot rode through many strange countries, till by fortune he came to a fair castle. And as he passed beyond the castle he thought he heard 2 bells ring. And then he perceived how a falcon came flying over his head, toward a high elm, and she had long loonies. Footnote: loonies, the string with which the falcon is held. She had long loonies about her feet, and she flew unto the elm to take her perch, and the loonies got entangled in the bough, and when she would have taken her flight, she hung by the legs fast. And Sir Launcelot saw how she hung, and beheld the fair falcon entangled, and he was sorry for her. Then came a lady out of the castle, and cried aloud, O Lancelot, Lancelot, as thou art the flower of all knights, help me to get my hawk. For if my hawk be lost, my lord will slay me, he is so hasty.
What is your lord's name? Said Sir Launcelot.
His name is Sir Phelot, a knight that belongeth to the King of North Wales.
Well, fair lady, since ye know my name, and require me of knighthood to help you, I will do what I may to get your hawk. And yet, in truth, I am an ill climber, and the tree is passing high, and few boughs to help me.
And therewith Sir Launcelot alighted, and tied his horse to the tree, and prayed the lady to unarm him. And when he was unarmed, he put off his jerkin, and with might and force he clomb up to the falcon, and tied the loonies to a rotten bough, and threw the hawk down with it. And the lady got the hawk in her hand. Then, suddenly, there came out of the castle her husband, all armed, and with his naked sword in his hand, and said, O knight Lancelot, now have I got thee as I would, and stood at the bole of the tree to slay him.
Ah, lady, said Sir Launcelot, why have ye betrayed me?
She hath done, said Sir Phelot, but as I commanded her, and therefore there is none other way, but thine hour is come, and thou must die.
That were shame unto thee, said Sir Launcelot, thou an armed knight, to slay a naked man by treason.
Thou gettest none other grace, said Sir Phelot, and therefore help thyself if thou canst.
Alas, said Sir Launcelot, that ever a knight should die weaponless.
And therewith he turned his eyes upward and downward, and over his head he saw a big bough leafless, and he brake it off from the trunk, and then he came lower and watched how his own horse stood, and suddenly he leapt on the further side of his horse from the knight. Then Sir Phelot lashed at him eagerly, meaning to have slain him, but Sir Launcelot put away the stroke with the big bough, and smote Sir Phelot therewith on the side of the head, so that he fell down in a swoon to the ground. Then Sir Launcelot took his sword out of his hand, and struck his head from the body. Then said the lady, Alas, why hast thou slain my husband?
I am not the cause, said Sir Launcelot, for with falsehood ye would have slain me, and now it is fallen on yourselves.
Thereupon Sir Launcelot got all his armour, and put it upon him hastily, for fear of more resort, for the knight's castle was so nigh, and as soon as he might he took his horse and departed, and thanked God he had escaped that adventure. And 2 days before the feast of Pentecost, Sir Launcelot came home, and the king and all the court were passing glad of his coming. And when Sir Gawain, Sir Uwaine, Sir Sagramore, and Sir Hector de Maris saw Sir Launcelot in Sir Kay's armour, then they wist well it was he that smote them down, all with one spear. Then there was laughing and merriment among them, and from time to time came all the knights that Sir Turquine had prisoners, and they all honoured and worshipped Sir Launcelot. Then Sir Gaheris said, I saw all the battle from the beginning to the end, and he told King Arthur all how it was. Then Sir Kay told the king how Sir Launcelot had rescued him, and how he made the knights yield to me, and not to him. And there they were, all three, and confirmed it all. And by my faith, said Sir Kay, because Sir Launcelot took my harness and left me his, I rode in peace, and no man would have to do with me. And so, at that time, Sir Launcelot had the greatest name of any knight of the world,
and most was he honored of high and low. End of chapter 8. Recording by Anders Lankford. Chapter 9 from Bulfinch's The Age of Chivalry. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Anders Lankford. The Age of Chivalry by Thomas Bulfinch. Chapter 9, The Adventure of the Cart. It befell in the month of May, Queen Guinevere called to her knights of the Table Round, and gave them warning that early upon the morrow she would ride a-maying into the woods and fields beside Westminster. And I warn ye that there be none of you but he be well horsed, and that ye all be clothed in green, either silk or cloth. And I shall bring with me 10 ladies, and every knight shall have a lady behind him, and every knight shall have a squire and 2 yeomen, and all well horsed. For thus it chanced one morn, when all the court, green-suited, but with plumes that mocked the May, had been their wont a-maying. Guinevere. So they made them ready, and these were the names of the knights: Sir Kay the Seneschal, Sir Agravaine, Sir Brandiles, Sir Sagramore le Desirous, Sir Dodinas le Sauvage, Sir Ozana, Sir Ladinas, Sir Persant of Inde, Sir Ironside, and Sir Pelias. And these 10 knights made them ready in the freshest manner to ride with the queen. So upon the morn they took their horses with the queen, and rode a-maying in woods and meadows as it pleased them, in great joy and delight. Now there was a knight named Maleagans, son to King Brademagus, who loved Queen Guinevere passing well, and so had he done long and many years. Now this knight, Sir Maleagans, learned the queen's purpose, and that she had no men of arms with her, but the 10 noble knights all arrayed in green for maying. So he prepared him 20 men of arms and 100 archers to take captive the queen and her knights. In the merry month of May, in a morn at break of day, with a troop of damsels playing, the queen forsooth went forth a-maying. Old song. So when the queen had made, and all were bedecked with herbs, mosses, and flowers in the best manner and freshest, right then came out of a wood Sir Maleagans, with 80 men well harnessed, and bade the queen and her knights yield them prisoners. Traitor knight, said Queen Guinevere, what wilt thou do? Wilt thou shame thyself? Bethink thee how thou art a king's son, and a knight of the Table Round, and how thou art about to dishonor all knighthood and thyself. Be it as it may, said Sir Maleagans. Know you well, madam, I have loved you many a year, and never till now could I get you to such advantage as I do now, and therefore I will take you as I find you. Then the 10 knights of the Round Table drew their swords, and the other party run at them with their spears. And the 10 knights manfully abode them, and smote away their spears. Then they lashed together with swords, till several were smitten to the earth. So when the queen saw her knights thus dolefully oppressed, and needs must be slain at the last, then for pity and sorrow she cried, Sir Maleagans, slay not my noble knights, and I will go with you upon this covenant, that they be led with me wheresoever thou leadest me. Madam, said Maleagans, for your sake they shall be led with you into my own castle, if that ye will be ruled and ride with me. Then Sir Maleagans charged them all that none should depart from the queen,
for he dreaded lest Sir Launcelot should have knowledge of what had been done. Then the queen privily called unto her a page of her chamber that was swiftly horsed, to whom she said, Go thou when thou seest thy time, and bear this ring unto Sir Launcelot, and pray him as he loveth me, that he will see me and rescue me, and spare not thy horse, said the queen, neither for water nor for land. So the child espied his time, and lightly he took his horse with the spurs, and departed as fast as he might. And when Sir Maleagans saw him so flee, he understood that it was by the queen's commandment for to warn Sir Launcelot. Then they that were best horsed chased him, and shot at him. But the child went from them all. Then Sir Maleagans said to the queen, Madam, ye are about to betray me, but I shall arrange for Sir Launcelot that he shall not come lightly at you. Then he rode with her, and them all, to his castle, in all the haste that they might. And by the way Sir Maleagans laid in ambush the best archers that he had, to wait for Sir Launcelot. And the child came to Westminster, and found Sir Launcelot, and told his message, and delivered him the queen's ring.
Alas, said Sir Launcelot, now I am shamed for ever, unless I may rescue that noble lady.
Then eagerly he asked his armor, and put it on him, and mounted his horse, and rode as fast as he might. And men say he took the water at Westminster Bridge, and made his horse swim over Thames unto Lambeth. Then, within a while, he came to a wood where was a narrow way, and there the archers were laid in ambush, and they shot at him, and smote his horse, so that he fell. Then Sir Launcelot left his horse and went on foot. But there lay so many ditches and hedges betwixt the archers and him, that he might not meddle with them.
Alas, for shame, said Sir Launcelot, that ever one knight should betray another. But it is an old saw, a good man is never in danger, but when he is in danger of a coward.
Then Sir Launcelot went a while, and he was exceedingly cumbered by his armor, his shield, and his spear, and all that belonged to him. Then by chance there came by him a cart that came thither to fetch wood. Now at this time carts were little used except for carrying offal, and for conveying criminals to execution. But Sir Launcelot took no thought of anything but the necessity of haste for the purpose of rescuing the queen. So he demanded of the carter that he should take him in, and convey him as speedily as possible for a liberal reward. The carter consented, and Sir Launcelot placed himself in the cart, and only lamented that with much jolting he made but little progress. Then it happened Sir Gawain passed by, and seeing an armed knight travelling in that unusual way, he drew near to see who it might be. Then Sir Launcelot told him how the queen had been carried off, and how in hastening to her rescue his horse had been disabled, and he had been compelled to avail himself of the cart rather than give up his enterprise. Then Sir Gawain said, Surely it is unworthy of a knight to travel in such sort. But Sir Launcelot heeded him not. At nightfall they arrived at a castle, and the lady thereof came out at the head of her damsels to welcome Sir Gawain. But to admit his companion, whom she supposed to be a criminal, or at least a prisoner, it pleased her not. However, to oblige Sir Gawain she consented. At supper Sir Launcelot came near being consigned to the kitchen, and was only admitted to the lady's table at the earnest solicitation of Sir Gawain. Neither would the damsels prepare a bed for him. He seized the first he found unoccupied, and was left undisturbed. Next morning he saw from the turrets of the castle a train accompanying a lady, whom he imagined to be the queen. Sir Gawain thought it might be so, and became equally eager to depart. The lady of the castle supplied Sir Launcelot with a horse, and they traversed the plain at full speed. They learned from some travelers whom they met that there were two roads which led to the castle of Sir Maleagans. Here, therefore, the friends separated. Sir Launcelot found his way beset with obstacles, which he encountered successfully, but not without much loss of time. As evening approached, he was met by a young and sportive damsel, who gaily proposed to him a supper at her castle. The knight, who was hungry and weary, accepted the offer, though with no very good grace. He followed the lady to her castle, and ate voraciously of her supper, but was quite impenetrable to all her amorous advances. Suddenly the scene changed, and he was assailed by 6 furious ruffians, whom he dealt with so vigorously that most of them were speedily disabled, when again there was a change, and he found himself alone with his fair hostess, who informed him that she was none other than his guardian fairy, who had but subjected him to tests of his courage and fidelity. The next day the fairy brought him on his road, and before parting gave him a ring, which she told him would by its changes of color disclose to him all enchantments, and enable him to subdue them. Sir Launcelot pursued his journey without being much incommoded except by the taunts of travelers, who all seemed to have learned by some means his disgraceful drive in the cart. One, more insolent than the rest, had the audacity to interrupt him during dinner, and even to risk a battle in support of his pleasantry. Launcelot, after an easy victory, only doomed him to be carted in his turn. At night he was received at another castle, with great apparent hospitality, but found himself in the morning in a dungeon and loaded with chains. Consulting his ring, and finding that this was an enchantment, he burst his chains, seized his armor in spite of the visionary monsters who attempted to defend it, broke open the gates of the tower, and continued his journey. At length his progress was checked by a wide and rapid torrent, which could only be passed on a narrow bridge, on which a false step would prove his destruction. Launcelot, leading his horse by the bridle, and making him swim by his side, passed over the bridge, and was attacked, as soon as he reached the bank, by a lion and a leopard, both of which he slew, and then, exhausted and bleeding, seated himself on the grass, and endeavored to bind up his wounds, when he was accosted by Bradamantus, the father of Maleagans, whose castle was then in sight, and at no great distance. This king, no less courteous than his son, was haughty and insolent. After complimenting Sir Launcelot on the valor and skill he had displayed in the perils of the bridge and the wild beasts, offered him his assistance, and informed him that the queen was safe in his castle, but could only be rescued by encountering Maleagans. Launcelot demanded the battle for the next day, and accordingly it took place at the foot of the tower, and under the eyes of the fair captive. Launcelot was enfeebled by his wounds, and fought not with his usual spirit, and the contest for a time was doubtful, till Guinevere exclaimed, "Ah, Launcelot, my knight, truly have I been told that thou art no longer worthy of me." These words instantly revived the drooping knight. He resumed at once his usual superiority, and soon laid at his feet his haughty adversary. He was on the point of sacrificing him to his resentment, when Guinevere, moved by the entreaties of Bradamantus, ordered him to withhold the blow, and he obeyed. The castle and its prisoners were now at his disposal. Launcelot hastened to the apartment of the queen, threw himself at her feet, and was about to kiss her hand, when she exclaimed, "Ah, Launcelot, why do I see thee again, yet feel thee to be no longer worthy of me, after having been disgracefully drawn about the country in a—" She had not time to finish the phrase, for her lover suddenly started from her, and bitterly lamenting that he had incurred the displeasure of his sovereign lady, rushed out of the castle, threw his sword and his shield to the right and left, ran furiously into the woods, and disappeared. It seems that the story of the abominable cart, which haunted Launcelot at every step, had reached the ears of Sir Kay, who had told it to the queen, as a proof that her knight must have been dishonored. But Guinevere had full leisure to repent the haste with which she had given credit to the tale. 3 days elapsed, during which Launcelot wandered without knowing where he went, till at last he began to reflect that his mistress had doubtless been deceived by misrepresentation, and that it was his duty to set her right. He therefore returned, compelled Maleagans to release his prisoners, and taking the road by which they expected the arrival of Sir Gawain, had the satisfaction of meeting him the next day, after which the whole company proceeded gaily towards Camelot. End of chapter 9. Recording by Anders Lankford.
The Age of Chivalry. Chapter 10, From Bulfinch's The Age of Chivalry. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Evan Barnes. The Age of Chivalry by Thomas Bulfinch. Chapter 10, The Lady of Shalot. King Arthur proclaimed a solemn tournament to be held at Winchester. The king, not less impatient than his knights for this festival, set off some days before to superintend the preparations, leaving the queen with her court at Camelot. Sir Lancelot, under pretence of indisposition, remained behind also. His intention was to attend the tournament, in disguise, and having communicated his project to Guinevere, he mounted his horse, set off without any attendant, and, counterfeiting the feebleness of age, took the most unfrequented road to Winchester, and passed unnoticed as an old knight who was going to be a spectator of the sports. Even Arthur and Gowan, who happened to behold him from the windows of a castle under which he passed, were the dupes of his disguise. But an accident betrayed him. His horse happened to stumble, and the hero, forgetting for a moment his assumed character, recovered the animal with a strength and agility so peculiar to himself that they instantly recognized the inimitable Lancelot. They suffered him, however, to proceed on his journey without interruption, convinced that his extraordinary feats of arms must discover him at the approaching festival. In the evening Lancelot was magnificently entertained as a stranger knight at the neighboring castle of Shalot. The lord of this castle had a daughter of exquisite beauty, and 2 sons lately received into the order of knighthood, one of whom was at that time ill in bed, and thereby prevented from attending the tournament, for which both brothers had long made preparation. Lancelot offered to attend the other, if he were permitted to borrow the armor of the invalid, and the lord of Shalot, without knowing the name of his guest, being satisfied from his appearance that his son could not have a better assistant in arms, most thankfully accepted the offer. In the meantime the young lady, who had been much struck by the first appearance of the stranger knight, continued to survey him with increased attention, and before the conclusion of supper became so deeply enamored of him that after frequent changes of color and other symptoms which Sir Launcelot could not possibly mistake, she was obliged to retire to her chamber, and seek relief in tears. Sir Launcelot hastened to convey to her, by means of her brother, the information that his heart was already disposed of, but that it would be his pride and pleasure to act as her knight at the approaching tournament. The lady, obliged to be satisfied with that courtesy, presented him her scarf to be worn at the tournament. Launcelot set off in the morning with the young knight, who, on their approaching Winchester, carried him to the castle of a lady, sister to the lord of Shalot, by whom they were hospitably entertained. The next day they put on their armor, which was perfectly plain and without any device, as was usual to youths during the first year of knighthood, their shields being only painted red, as some color was necessary to enable them to be recognized by their attendants. Launcelot wore on his crest the scarf of the Maid of Shalott, and thus equipped, proceeded to the tournament, where the knights were divided into 2 companies, the one commanded by Sir Galahad, the other by King Arthur. Having surveyed the combat for a short time from without the lists, and observed that Sir Galahad's party began to give way, they joined the press and attacked the royal knights, the young man choosing such adversaries as were suited to his strength, while his companions selected the principal champions of the Round Table, and successively overthrew Gowan, Bohort, and Lionel. The astonishment of the spectators was extreme, for it was thought that no one but Launcelot could possess such invincible force. Yet the favor on his crest seemed to preclude the possibility of his being thus disguised, for Launcelot had never been known to wear the badge of any but his sovereign lady. At length Sir Hector, Launcelot's brother, engaged him, and after a dreadful combat wounded him dangerously in the head, but was himself completely stunned by a blow on the helmet, and fell to the ground, after which the conqueror rode off at full speed, attended by his companion. They returned to the castle of Shalot, where Lancelot was attended with the greatest care by the good earl, by his 2 sons, and above all by his fair daughter, whose medical skill probably much hastened the period of his recovery. His health was almost completely restored, when Sir Hector, Sir Bohort, and Sir Lionel, who after the return of the court to Camelot had undertaken the quest of their relation, discovered him walking on the walls of the castle. Their meeting was very joyful. They passed 3 days in the castle amidst constant festivities, and bantered each other on the events of the tournament. Lancelot, though he began by vowing vengeance against the author of his wound, yet ended by declaring that he felt rewarded for the pain by the pride he took in witnessing his brother's extraordinary prowess. He then dismissed them with a message to the queen, promising to follow immediately, it being necessary that he should first take a formal leave of his kind hosts, as well as of the fair maid of Shalot. The young lady, after vainly attempting to detain him by her tears and solicitations, saw him depart without leaving her any ground for hope. It was early summer when the tournament took place, but some months had passed since Lancelot's departure, and winter was now near at hand. The health and strength of the Lady of Shalott had gradually sunk, and she felt that she could not live apart from the object of her affections. She left the castle, and descending to the river's brink placed herself in a boat, which she loosed from its moorings, and suffered to bear her down the current toward Camelot. One morning, as Arthur and Sir Lionel looked from the window of the tower, the walls of which were washed by a river, they descried a boat richly ornamented, and covered with an awning of cloth of gold, which appeared to be floating down the stream without any human guidance. It struck the shore while they watched it, and they hastened down to examine it. Beneath the awning they discovered the dead body of a beautiful woman, in whose features Sir Lionel easily recognized the lovely maid of Shalott. Pursuing their search, they discovered a purse richly embroidered with gold and jewels, and within the purse a letter, which Arthur opened, and found addressed to himself and all the knights of the Round Table, stating that Lancelot of the Lake, the most accomplished of knights and most beautiful of men, but at the same time the most cruel and inflexible, had by his rigor produced the death of the wretched maiden, whose love was no less invincible than his cruelty. The king immediately gave orders for the interment of the lady with all the honors suited to her rank, at the same time explaining to the knights the history of her affection for Lancelot, which moved the compassion and regret of all. Tennyson has chosen the story of the Lady of Shalott for the subject of a poem. The catastrophe is told thus: Under tower and balcony, by garden wall and gallery, a gleaming shape she floated by, a course between the houses high, silent into Camelot. Out upon the wharfs they came, knight and burgher, lord and dame, and round the prow they read her name, the Lady of Shalott. Who is this, and what is here? And in the lighted palace near died the sound of royal cheer, and they crossed themselves for fear, all the knights at Camelot. But Launcelot mused a little space. He said, She has a lovely face. God in his mercy lend her grace, the Lady of Shalott. End of chapter 10.
Bulfinch's The Age of Chivalry. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Age of Chivalry by Thomas Bulfinch. Chapter 11. Queen Guenevere's Peril. It happened at this time that Queen Guenevere was thrown into great peril of her life. A certain squire who was in her immediate service, having some cause of animosity to Sir Gawain, determined to destroy him by poison, at a public entertainment. For this purpose he concealed the poison in an apple of fine appearance, which he placed on the top of several others, and put the dish before the queen, hoping that, as Sir Gawain was the knight of greatest dignity, she would present the apple to him. But it happened that a Scottish knight of high distinction, who arrived on that day, was seated next to the queen, and to him as a stranger she presented the apple, which he had no sooner eaten than was seized with a dreadful pain, and fell senseless. The whole court was, of course, thrown into confusion. The knights rose from table, darting looks of indignation at the wretched queen, whose tears and protestations were unable to remove their suspicions. In spite of all that could be done, the knight died, and nothing remained but to order a magnificent funeral and monument for him, which was done. Some time after Sir Mador, brother of the murdered knight, arrived at Arthur's court in quest of him. While hunting in the forest he by chance came to the spot where the monument was erected, read the inscription, and returned to court determined on immediate and signal vengeance. He rode into the hall, loudly accused the queen of treason, and insisted on her being given up for punishment, unless she should find by a certain day a knight hardy enough to risk his life in support of her innocence. Arthur, powerful as he was, did not dare to deny the appeal, but was compelled with a heavy heart to accept it, and Mador sternly took his departure, leaving the royal couple plunged in terror and anxiety. During all this time Lancelot was absent, and no one knew where he was. He fled in anger from his fair mistress, upon being reproached by her with his passion for the Lady of Shalott, which she had hastily inferred from his wearing her scarf at the tournament. He took up his abode with a hermit in the forest, and resolved to think no more of the cruel beauty, whose conduct he thought must flow from a wish to get rid of him. Yet calm reflection had somewhat cooled his indignation, and he had begun to wish, though hardly able to hope, for a reconciliation, when the news of Sir Mador's challenge fortunately reached his ears. The intelligence revived his spirits, and he began to prepare with the utmost cheerfulness for a contest which, if successful, would ensure him at once the affection of his mistress and the gratitude of his sovereign. The sad fate of the Lady of Shalott had ere this completely acquitted Lancelot in the queen's mind of all suspicion of his fidelity, and she lamented most grievously her foolish quarrel with him, which now, at her time of need, deprived her of her most efficient champion. As the day appointed by Sir Mador was fast approaching, it became necessary that she should procure a champion for her defence, and she successfully adjured Sir Hector, Sir Lionel, Sir Bohort, and Sir Gawain to undertake the battle. She fell on her knees before them, called heaven to witness her innocence of the crime alleged against her, but was sternly answered by all that they could not fight to maintain the innocence of one whose act, and the fatal consequence of it, they had seen with their own eyes. She retired, therefore, dejected and disconsolate, but the sight of the fatal pile on which, if guilty, she was doomed to be burned, exciting her to fresh effort, she again repaired to Sir Bohort, threw herself at his feet, and piteously calling on him for mercy, fell into a swoon. The brave knight was not proof against this. He raised her up, and hastily promised that he would undertake her cause, if no other or better champion should present himself. He then summoned his friends, and told them his resolution, and as a mortal combat with Sir Mador was a most fearful enterprise, they agreed to accompany him in the morning to the hermitage in the forest, where he proposed to receive absolution from the hermit, and to make his peace with heaven before he entered the lists. As they approached the hermitage, they espied a knight riding in the forest, whom they at once recognized as Sir Lancelot. Overjoyed at the meeting, they quickly, in answer to his questions, confirmed the news of the queen's imminent danger, and received his instructions to return to court, to comfort her as well as they could, but to say nothing of his intention of undertaking her defence, which he meant to do in the character of an unknown adventurer. On their return to the castle they found that mass was finished, and had scarcely time to speak to the queen before they were summoned into the hall to dinner. A general gloom was spread over the countenances of all the guests. Arthur himself was unable to conceal his dejection, and the wretched Guinevere, motionless and bathed in tears, sat in trembling expectation of Sir Mador's appearance. Nor was it long ere he stalked into the hall, and with a voice of thunder, rendered more impressive by the general silence, demanded instant justice on the guilty party. Arthur replied with dignity that little of the day was yet spent, and that perhaps a champion might yet be found capable of satisfying his thirst for battle. Sir Bohort now rose from the table, and shortly returning in complete armour, resumed his place, after receiving the embraces and thanks of the king, who now began to resume some degree of confidence. Sir Mador, growing impatient, again repeated his denunciation of vengeance, and insisted that the combat should no longer be postponed. In the height of the debate there came riding into the hall a knight mounted on a black steed, and clad in black armour, with his visor drawn, and lance in hand. "Sir," said the king, "is it your will to alight and partake of our cheer?" "Nay, sir," he replied, "I come to save a lady's life. The queen hath ill bestowed her favours, and honoured many a knight, that in her hour of need she should have none to take her part. Thou that darest accuse her of treachery, stand forth, for to day shalt thou need all thy might." Sir Mador, though surprised, was not appalled by the stern challenge and formidable appearance of his antagonist, but prepared for the encounter. At the first shock both were unhorsed. They then drew their swords, and commenced a combat which lasted from noon till evening, when Sir Mador, whose strength began to fail, was felled to the ground by Lancelot, and compelled to sue for mercy. The victor, whose arm was already raised to terminate the life of his opponent, instantly dropped his sword, courteously lifted up the fainting Sir Mador, frankly confessing that he had never before encountered so formidable an enemy. The other, with similar courtesy, solemnly renounced all further projects of vengeance for his brother's death, and the two knights, now became fast friends, embraced each other with the greatest cordiality. In the meantime Arthur, having recognized Sir Lancelot, whose helmet was now unlaced, rushed down into the lists, followed by all his knights, to welcome and thank his deliverer. Guenever swooned with joy, and the place of combat suddenly exhibited a scene of the most tumultuous delight. The general satisfaction was still further increased by the discovery of the real culprit. Having accidentally incurred some suspicion, he confessed his crime, and was publicly punished in the presence of Sir Mador. The court now returned to the castle, which, with the title of La Joyeuse Garde, bestowed upon it in memory of the happy event, was conferred on Sir Lancelot by Arthur, as a memorial of his gratitude. End of chapter 11.
From Bulfinch's The Age of Chivalry. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Age of Chivalry by Thomas Bulfinch. Chapter 12. Tristram and Isode. Meliadus was king of Lyonnois, or Lyonesse, a country famous in the annals of romance, which adjoined the kingdom of Cornwall, but has now disappeared from the map, having been, it is said, overwhelmed by the ocean. Meliadus was married to Isabella, sister of Mark, king of Cornwall. A fairy fell in love with him and drew him away by enchantment while he was engaged in hunting. His queen set out in quest of him, but was taken ill on her journey and died, leaving an infant son, whom, from the melancholy circumstances of his birth, she called Tristram. Gouvernail, the queen's squire, who had accompanied her, took charge of the child and restored him to his father, who had at length burst the enchantments of the fairy and returned home. Meliadus after 7 years married again, and the new queen, being jealous of the influence of Tristram with his father, laid plots for his life, which were discovered by Gouvernail, who in consequence fled with the boy to the court of the king of France, where Tristram was kindly received, and grew up improving in every gallant and knightly accomplishment, adding to his skill in arms the arts of music and of chess. In particular he devoted himself to the chase, and to all woodland sports, so that he became distinguished above all other chevaliers of the court for his knowledge of all that relates to hunting. No wonder that Belinda, the king's daughter, fell in love with him, but as he did not return her passion, she, in a sudden impulse of anger, excited her father against him, and he was banished the kingdom. The princess soon repented of her act, and in despair destroyed herself, having first written a most tender letter to Tristram, sending him at the same time a beautiful and sagacious dog of which she was very fond, desiring him to keep it as a memorial of her. Meliadus was now dead, and as his queen, Tristram's stepmother held the throne. Gouvernail was afraid to carry his pupil to his native country, and took him to Cornwall to his uncle Mark, who gave him a kind reception. King Mark resided at the castle of Tintagel, already mentioned in the history of Uther and Aigerne, In this court Tristram became distinguished in all the exercises incumbent on a knight, nor was it long before he had an opportunity of practically employing his valor and skill. Moraunt, a celebrated champion, brother to the Queen of Ireland, arrived at the court to demand tribute of King Mark. The knights of Cornwall are in ill repute in romance for their cowardice, and they exhibited it on this occasion. King Mark could find no champion who dared to encounter the Irish knight, till his nephew Tristram, who had not yet received the honours of knighthood, craved to be admitted to the order, offering at the same time to fight the battle of Cornwall against the Irish champion. King Mark assented with reluctance. Tristram received the accolade which conferred knighthood upon him, and the place and time were assigned for the encounter. Without attempting to give the details of this famous combat, the first and one of the most glorious of Tristram's exploits, we shall only say that the young knight, though severely wounded, cleft the head of Moraunt, leaving a portion of his sword in the wound. Moraunt, half dead with his wound and the disgrace of his defeat, hastened to hide himself in his ship, sailed away with all speed for Ireland, and died soon after arriving in his own country. The kingdom of Cornwall was thus delivered from its tribute. Tristram, weakened by loss of blood, fell senseless. His friends flew to his assistance. They dressed his wounds, which in general healed readily, but the lance of Moraunt was poisoned, and one wound which it made yielded to no remedies, but grew worse day by day. The surgeons could do no more. Tristram asked permission of his uncle to depart and seek for aid in the kingdom of Loegria, England. With his consent he embarked, and after tossing for many days on the sea, was driven by the winds to the coast of Ireland. He landed, full of joy and gratitude that he had escaped the peril of the sea, took his rote, a musical instrument, and began to play. It was a summer evening, and the King of Ireland and his daughter, the beautiful Isode, were at a window which overlooked the sea. The strange harper was sent for, and conveyed to the palace, where, finding that he was in Ireland, whose champion he had lately slain, he concealed his name and called himself Tramtris. The queen undertook his cure, and by a medicated bath gradually restored him to health. His skill in music and in games occasioned his being frequently called to court, and he became the instructor of the Princess Isode in minstrelsy and poetry, who profited so well under his care that she soon had no equal in the kingdom, except her instructor. At this time a tournament was held, at which many knights of the Round Table and others were present. On the first day a Saracen prince named Palamedes obtained the advantage over all. They brought him to the court and gave him a feast, at which Tristram, just recovering from his wound, was present. The fair Isode appeared on this occasion in all her charms. Palamedes could not behold them without emotion, and made no effort to conceal his love. Tristram perceived it, and the pain he felt from jealousy taught him how dear the fair Isode had already become to him. Next day the tournament was renewed. Tristram, still feeble from his wound, rose during the night, took his arms and concealed them in a forest near the place of the contest, and, after it had begun, mingled with the combatants. He overthrew all that encountered him, in particular Palamedes, whom he brought to the ground with a stroke of his lance, and then fought him hand to hand, bearing off the prize of the tourney. But his exertions caused his wound to reopen. He bled fast, and in this sad state, yet in triumph, they bore him to the palace. The fair Isode devoted herself to his relief with an interest which grew more vivid day by day, and her skilful care soon restored him to health. It happened one day that a damsel of the court, entering the closet where Tristram's arms were deposited, perceived that a part of the sword had been broken off. It occurred to her that the missing portion was like that which was left in the skull of Moraunt, the Irish champion. She imparted her thought to the queen, who compared the fragment taken from her brother's wound with the sword of Tristram, and was satisfied that it was part of the same, and that the weapon of Tristram was that which reft her brother's life. She laid her griefs and resentments before the king, who satisfied himself with his own eyes of the truth of her suspicions. Tristram was cited before the whole court, and reproached with having dared to present himself before them after having slain their kinsman. He acknowledged that he had fought with Moraunt to settle the claim for tribute, and said that it was by force of winds and waves alone that he was thrown on their coast. The queen demanded vengeance for the death of her brother. The fair Isode trembled and grew pale, but a murmur rose from all the assembly that the life of one so handsome and so brave should not be taken for such a cause, and generosity finally triumphed over resentment in the mind of the king. Tristram was dismissed in safety, but commanded to leave the kingdom without delay, and never to return thither under pain of death. Tristram went back, with restored health, to Cornwall. King Mark made his nephew give him a minute recital of his adventures. Tristram told him all minutely, but when he came to speak of the fair Isode, he described her charms with a warmth and energy such as none but a lover could display. King Mark was fascinated with the description, and choosing a favorable time, demanded a boon. [Footnote: Good faith was the very cornerstone of chivalry. Whenever a knight's word was pledged, it mattered not how rashly, it was to be redeemed at any price. Hence the sacred obligation of the boon granted by a knight to his suppliant. Instances without number occurred in romance, in which a knight, by rashly granting an indefinite boon, was obliged to do or suffer something extremely to his prejudice. But it is not in romance alone that we find such singular instances of adherence to an indefinite promise. The history of the times presents authentic transactions equally embarrassing and absurd. Scott, Note to Sir Tristram. Of his nephew, who readily granted it, the king made him swear upon the holy relics that he would fulfil his commands. Then Mark directed him to go to Ireland, and obtain for him the fair Isode to be Queen of Cornwall. Tristram believed it was certain death for him to return to Ireland, and how could he act as ambassador for his uncle in such a cause? Yet, bound by his oath, he hesitated not for an instant. He only took the precaution to change his armour. He embarked for Ireland, but a tempest drove him to the coast of England, near Camelot, where King Arthur was holding his court, attended by the knights of the Round Table, and many others, the most illustrious in the world. Tristram kept himself unknown. He took part in many jousts. He fought many combats, in which he covered himself with glory. One day he saw among those recently arrived the King of Ireland, father of the fair Isode. This prince, accused of treason against his liege sovereign Arthur, came to Camelot to free himself from the charge. Blanor, one of the most redoubtable warriors of the Round Table, was his accuser, and Argius the king had neither youthful vigour nor strength to encounter him. He must therefore seek a champion to sustain his innocence. But the knights of the Round Table were not at liberty to fight against one another unless in a quarrel of their own. Argius heard of the great renown of the unknown knight. He also was witness of his exploits. He sought him and conjured him to adopt his defence, and on his oath declared that he was innocent of the crime of which he was accused. Tristram readily consented and made himself known to the king, who on his part promised to reward his exertions, if successful, with whatever gift he might ask. Tristram fought with Blanor and overthrew him, and held his life in his power. The fallen warrior called on him to use his right of conquest and strike the fatal blow. "God forbid," said Tristram, "that I should take the life of so brave a knight." He raised him up and restored him to his friends. The judges of the field decided that the King of Ireland was acquitted of the charge against him, and they led Tristram in triumph to his tent. King Argius, full of gratitude, conjured Tristram to accompany him to his kingdom. They departed together and arrived in Ireland, and the queen, forgetting her resentment for her brother's death, exhibited to the preserver of her husband's life nothing but gratitude and goodwill. How happy a moment for Isode, who knew that her father had promised his deliverer whatever boon he might ask. But the unhappy Tristram gazed on her with despair at the thought of the cruel oath which bound him. His magnanimous soul subdued the force of his love. He revealed the oath which he had taken, and with trembling voice demanded the fair Isode for his uncle. Argius consented, and soon all was prepared for the departure of Isode. Brengwain, her favourite maid of honour, was to accompany her. On the day of the departure the queen took aside this devoted attendant, and told her that she had observed that her daughter and Tristram were attached to one another, and that to avert the bad effects of this inclination she had procured from a powerful fairy a potent philtre, love draught, which she directed Brengwain to administer to Isode and to King Mark on the evening of their marriage. Isode and Tristram embarked together. A favourable wind filled the sails and promised them a fortunate voyage. The lovers gazed upon one another and could not repress their sighs. Love seemed to light up all his fires on their lips, as in their hearts. The day was warm, they suffered from thirst. Isode first complained. Tristram descried the bottle containing the love-draught, which Brengwain had been so imprudent as to leave in sight. He took it, gave some of it to the charming Isode, and drank the remainder himself. The dog Houdin licked the cup. The ship arrived in Cornwall, and Isode was married to King Mark. The old monarch was delighted with his bride, and his gratitude to Tristram was unbounded. He loaded him with honours and made him chamberlain of his palace, thus giving him access to the queen at all times. In the midst of the festivities of the court which followed the royal marriage, an unknown minstrel one day presented himself, bearing a harp of peculiar construction. He excited the curiosity of King Mark by refusing to play upon it till he should grant him a boon. The king having promised to grant his request, the minstrel, who was none other than the Saracen knight Sir Palamedes, the lover of the fair Isode, sung to the harp a lay in which he demanded Isode as the promised gift. King Mark could not by the laws of knighthood withhold the boon. The lady was mounted on her horse and led away by her triumphant lover. Tristram, it is needless to say, was absent at the time, and did not return until their departure. When he heard what had taken place, he seized his rote and hastened to the shore, where Isode and her new master had already embarked. Tristram played upon his rote, and the sound reached the ears of Isode, who became so deeply affected that Sir Palamedes was induced to return with her to land, that they might see the unknown musician. Tristram watched his opportunity, seized the lady's horse by the bridle, and plunged with her into the forest, tauntingly informing his rival that what he had got by the harp he had lost by the rote. Palamedes pursued, and a combat was about to commence, the result of which must have been fatal to one or the other of these gallant knights. But Isode stepped between them, and addressing Palamedes said, "You tell me that you love me. You will not then deny me the request I am about to make?" "Lady," he replied, "I will perform your bidding." "Leave then," said she, "this contest, and repair to King Arthur's court, and salute Queen Guinevere from me. Tell her that there are in the world but two ladies, herself and I, and two lovers, hers and mine, and come thou not in future in any place where I am." Palamedes burst into tears. "Ah, lady," said he, "I will obey you, but I beseech you that you will not forever steel your heart against me." "Palamedes," she replied, "may I never taste of joy again if I ever quit my first love." Palamedes then went his way. The lovers remained a week in concealment, after which Tristram restored Isode to her husband, advising him in future to reward minstrels in some other way. The king showed much gratitude to Tristram, but in the bottom of his heart he cherished bitter jealousy of him. One day Tristram and Isode were alone together in her private chamber. A base and cowardly knight of the court, named Andret, spied them through a keyhole. They sat at a table of chess, but were not attending to the game. Andret brought the king, having first raised his suspicions, and placed him so as to watch their motions. The king saw enough to confirm his suspicions, and he burst into the apartment with his sword drawn, and had nearly slain Tristram before he was put on his guard. But Tristram avoided the blow, drew his sword, and drove before him the cowardly monarch, chasing him through all the apartments of the palace, giving him frequent blows with the flat of his sword, while he cried in vain to his knights to save him. They were not inclined, or did not dare, to interpose on his behalf. A proof of the great popularity of the tale of Sir Tristram is the fact that the Italian poets, Boiardo and Ariosto, have founded upon it the idea of the two enchanted fountains, which produced the opposite effects of love and hatred. Boiardo thus describes the fountain of hatred. Fair was that fountain, sculptured all of gold, with alabaster sculptured rich and rare, and in its basin clear thou mightst behold the flowery marge reflected fresh and fair. Sage Merlin framed the font, so legends bear, when on fair Isode doted Tristram brave, that the good errant knight arriving there might quaff oblivion in the enchanted wave, and leave his luckless love, and 'scape his timeless grave. But ne'er the warrior's evil fate allowed his steps that fountain's charmed verge to gain, though restless, roving on adventure proud, he traversed oft the land and oft the main. End of chapter 12.
From Bulfinch's The Age of Chivalry. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Barry Eads. The Age of Chivalry by Thomas Bulfinch. Chapter 13. Tristram and Isode. After this affair, Tristram was banished from the kingdom, and Isode shut up in a tower which stood on the bank of a river. Tristram could not resolve to depart without some further communication with his beloved, so he concealed himself in the forest, till at last he contrived to attract her attention, by means of twigs which he curiously peeled, and sent down the stream under her window. By this means many secret interviews were obtained. Tristram dwelt in the forest, sustaining himself by game, which the dog Houdain ran down for him, for this faithful animal was unequalled in the chase, and knew so well his master's wish for concealment that in the pursuit of his game he never barked. At length Tristram departed, but left Houdain with Isode, as a remembrancer of him. Sir Tristram wandered through various countries, achieving the most perilous enterprises, and covering himself with glory, yet unhappy at the separation from his beloved Isode. At length King Mark's territory was invaded by a neighbouring chieftain, and he was forced to summon his nephew to his aid. Tristram obeyed the call, put himself at the head of his uncle's vassals, and drove the enemy out of the country. Mark was full of gratitude, and Tristram, restored to favour and to the society of his beloved Isode, seemed at the summit of happiness. But a sad reverse was at hand. Tristram had brought with him a friend named Pheredin, son of the King of Brittany. This young knight saw Queen Isode, and could not resist her charms. Knowing the love of his friend for the Queen, and that the love was returned, Pheredin concealed his own, until his health failed, and he feared he was drawing near his end. He then wrote to the beautiful Queen that he was dying for love of her. The gentle Isode, in a moment of pity for the friend of Tristram, returned him an answer so kind and compassionate that it restored him to life. A few days afterwards Tristram found this letter. The most terrible jealousy took possession of his soul. He would have slain Pheredin, who with difficulty made his escape. Then Tristram mounted his horse and rode to the forest, where for 10 days he took no rest nor food. At length he was found by a damsel lying almost dead by the brink of a fountain. She recognized him, and tried in vain to rouse his attention. At last recollecting his love for music, she went and got her harp, and played thereon. Tristram was roused from his reverie, tears flowed, he breathed more freely. He took the harp from the maiden, and sung this lay, with a voice broken with sobs. Sweet I sang in former days, kind love perfected my lays. Now my art alone displays the woe that on my being preys. Charming love, delicious power, worshipped from my earliest hour, thou who life on all dost shower, love, my life thou dost devour. In death's hour I beg of thee, Isode, dearest enemy, thou who erst couldst kinder be, when I'm gone forget not me. On my gravestone passers by oft will read as low I lie, never wit in love could vie with Tristram, yet she let him die. Tristram, having finished his lay, wrote it off and gave it to the damsel, conjuring her to present it to the Queen. Meanwhile Queen Isode was inconsolable at the absence of Tristram. She discovered that it was caused by the fatal letter which she had written to Pheredin. Innocent, but in despair at the sad effects of her letter, she wrote another to Pheredin, charging him never to see her again. The unhappy lover obeyed this cruel decree. He plunged into the forest, and died of grief and love in a hermit's cell. Isode passed her days in lamenting the absence and unknown fate of Tristram. One day her jealous husband, having entered her chamber unperceived, overheard her singing the following lay: My voice to piteous wail is bent, My harp to notes of languishment. Ah, love, delightsome days be meant For happier wits with heart's content. Ah, Tristram, far away from me, Art thou from restless anguish free? Ah, couldst thou so one moment be From her who so much loveth thee? The king hearing these words burst forth in a rage, but Isode was too wretched to fear his violence. You have heard me, she said. I confess it all. I love Tristram, and always shall love him. Without doubt he is dead, and died for me. I no longer wish to live. The blow that shall finish my misery will be most welcome. The king was moved at the distress of the fair Isode, and perhaps the idea of Tristram's death tended to allay his wrath. He left the queen in charge of her women, commanding them to take especial care lest her despair should lead her to do harm to herself. Tristram, meanwhile, distracted as he was, rendered a most important service to the shepherds by slaying a gigantic robber named Tullus, who was in the habit of plundering their flocks and rifling their cottages. The shepherds, in their gratitude to Tristram, bore him in triumph to King Mark to have him bestow on him a suitable reward. No wonder Mark failed to recognize in the half-clad wild man before him his nephew Tristram, but grateful for the service the unknown had rendered, he ordered him to be well taken care of, and gave him in charge to the queen and her women. Under such care Tristram rapidly recovered his serenity and his health, so that the romancer tells us he became handsomer than ever. King Mark's jealousy revived with Tristram's health and good looks, and, in spite of his debt of gratitude so lately increased, he again banished him from the court. Sir Tristram left Cornwall, and proceeded into the land of Logria, England, in quest of adventures. One day he entered a wide forest. The sound of a little bell showed him that some inhabitant was near. He followed the sound, and found a hermit, who informed him that he was in the forest of Arnantis, belonging to the fairy Vivian, the Lady of the Lake, who, smitten with love for King Arthur, had found means to entice him to this forest, where by enchantments she held him a prisoner, having deprived him of all memory of who and what he was. The hermit informed him that all the knights of the Round Table were out in search of the king, and that he, Tristram, was now in the scene of the most grand and important adventures. This was enough to animate Tristram in the search. He had not wandered far before he encountered a knight of Arthur's court, who proved to be Sir Kay from Seneschal, who demanded of him whence he came. Tristram answering from Cornwall, Sir Kay did not let slip the opportunity of a joke at the expense of the Cornish knight. Tristram chose to leave him in his error, and even confirmed him in it. For meeting some other knights, Tristram declined to just with them. They spent the night together at an abbey, where Tristram submitted patiently to all their jokes. The Seneschal gave the word to his companions that they should set out early next day, and intercept the Cornish knight on his way, and enjoy the amusement of seeing his fright when they should insist on running a tilt with him. Tristram next morning found himself alone. He put on his armor, and set out to continue his quest. He soon saw before him the Seneschal and the three knights, who barred the way and insisted on a just. Tristram excused himself a long time. At last he reluctantly took his stand. He encountered them, one after the other, and overthrew all four, man and horse, and then rode off, bidding them not to forget their friend the Knight of Cornwall. Tristram had not ridden far when he met a damsel, who cried out, "Ah, my lord, hasten forward, and prevent a horrid treason." Tristram flew to her assistance, and soon reached a spot where he beheld a knight, whom three others had borne to the ground, and were unlacing his helmet in order to cut off his head. Tristram flew to the rescue, and slew with one stroke of his lance one of the assailants. The knight, recovering his feet, sacrificed another to his vengeance, and the third made his escape. The rescued knight then raised the visor of his helmet, and a long white beard fell down upon his breast. The majesty and venerable air of this knight made Tristram suspect that it was none other than Arthur himself, and the prince confirmed his conjecture. Tristram would have knelt before him, but Arthur received him in his arms, and inquired his name and country. But Tristram declined to disclose them. on the plea that he was now on a quest requiring secrecy. At this moment the damsel who had brought Tristram to the rescue darted forward, and seizing the king's hand, drew from his finger a ring, the gift of the fairy, and by that act dissolved the enchantment. Arthur, having recovered his reason and his memory, offered to Tristram to attach him to his court, and to confer honours and dignities upon him, but Tristram declined all, and only consented to accompany him till he should see him safe in the hands of his knights. Soon after Hector de Marys rode up and saluted the king, who on his part introduced him to Tristram as one of the bravest of his knights. Tristram took leave of the king and his faithful follower, and continued his quest. We cannot follow Tristram through all the adventures which filled this epoch of his history. Suffice it to say, he fulfilled on all occasions the duty of a true knight, rescuing the oppressed, redressing wrongs, abolishing evil customs, and suppressing injustice, thus by constant action endeavoring to lighten the pains of absence from her he loved. In the meantime Isode, separated from her dear Tristram, passed her days in languor and regret. At length she could no longer resist the desire to hear some news of her lover. She wrote a letter, and sent it by one of her damsels, niece of her faithful Gwen. One day Tristram, weary with his exertions, had dismounted and laid himself down by the side of a fountain and fallen asleep. The damsel of the Queen Isode arrived at the same fountain, and recognized Passebreul, the horse of Tristram, and presently perceived his master asleep. He was thin and pale, showing evident marks of the pain he suffered in separation from his beloved. She awakened him, and gave him the letter which she bore, and Tristram enjoyed the pleasure, so sweet to a lover, of hearing from and talking about the object of his affections. He prayed the damsel to postpone her return till after the magnificent tournament which Arthur had proclaimed should have taken place, and conducted her to the castle of Persides, a brave and loyal knight, who received her with great consideration. Tristram conducted the damsel of Queen Isode to the tournament, and had her placed in the balcony among the ladies of the queen. He glanced and saw the stately galleries, dame, damsel, each through worship of their queen, white-robed in honor of the stainless child, and some with scattered jewels like a bank, of maiden snow mingled with sparks of fire. He looked but once, and veiled his eyes again. The last tournament. He then joined the tourney. Nothing could exceed his strength and valor. Lancelot admired him, and by a secret presentiment declined to dispute the honor of the day with a knight so gallant and so skilful. Arthur descended from the balcony to greet the conqueror, but the modest and devoted Tristram, content with having borne off the prize in the sight of the messenger of Isode, made his escape with her, and disappeared. The next day the tourney recommenced. Tristram assumed different armor that he might not be known, but he was soon detected by the terrible blows that he gave. Arthur and Guinevere had no doubt that it was the same knight who had borne off the prize of the day before. Arthur's gallant spirit was roused. After Lancelot of the Lake and Sir Gawain, he was accounted the best knight of the Round Table. He went privately and armed himself, and came into the tourney in undistinguished armor. He ran a just with Tristram, whom he shook in his seat, but Tristram, who did not know him, threw him out of the saddle. Arthur recovered himself, and content with having made proof of the stranger knight, bade Lancelot finish the adventure, and vindicate the honor of the Round Table. Sir Lancelot, at the bidding of the monarch, assailed Tristram, whose lance was already broken in former encounters. But the law of this sort of combat was that the knight, after having broken his lance, must fight with his sword, and must not refuse to meet with his shield the lance of his antagonist. Tristram met Lancelot's charge upon his shield, which that terrible lance could not fail to pierce. It inflicted a wound upon Tristram's side, and breaking, left the iron in the wound. But Tristram also with his sword smote so vigorously on Lancelot's casque that he cleft it, and wounded his head. The wound was not deep, but the blood flowed into his eyes, and blinded him for a moment, and Tristram, who thought himself mortally wounded, retired from the field. Lancelot declared to the king that he had never received such a blow in his life before. Tristram hastened to Gouvernail, his squire, who drew forth the iron, bound up the wound, and gave him immediate ease. Tristram after the tournament kept retired in his tent, but Arthur, with the consent of all the knights of the Round Table, decreed him the honors of the second day. But it was no longer a secret that the victor of the 2 days was the same individual. and Gouvernail, being questioned, confirmed the suspicions of Launcelot and Arthur that it was no other than Sir Tristram of Lyoness, the nephew of the King of Cornwall. King Arthur, who desired to reward his distinguished valor, and knew that his uncle Mark had ungratefully banished him, would have eagerly availed himself of the opportunity to attach Tristram to his court, all the knights of the Round Table declaring with acclamation that it would be impossible to find a more worthy companion. But Tristram had already departed in search of adventures, and the damsel of Queen Isoude returned to her mistress. End of chapter 13.
The Age of Chivalry, Chapter 14, from Bulfinch, The Age of Chivalry. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Age of Chivalry by Thomas Bulfinch. Chapter 14, Sir Tristram's Battle with Sir Lancelot. Sir Tristram rode through a forest and saw 10 men fighting, and 1 man did battle against 9. So he rode to the knights and cried to them, bidding them cease their battle, for they did themselves great shame, so many knights to fight against 1. Then answered the master of the knights, his name was Sir Brose, sans pity, who was at that time the most villainous knight living. Sir knight, what have you to do to meddle with us? If ye be wise, depart on your way as you came, for this night shall not escape us. That were pity, said Sir Tristram, that so good a knight should be slain so cowardly. Therefore I warn you I will succour him with all my puissance. Then Sir Tristram alighted off his horse, because they were on foot, that they should not slay his horse, and he smote on the right hand and on the left so vigorously that well nigh at every stroke he struck down a knight. At last they fled, with Brose sans pity, into the tower, and shut Sir Tristram without the gate. Then Sir Tristram returned back to the rescued knight, and found him sitting under a tree, sore wounded. Fair knight, said he, how is it with you? Sir knight, said Sir Palamedes, for he it was, I thank you of your great goodness, for you have rescued me from death. What is your name? Said Sir Tristram. He said, My name is Sir Palamedes. Say ye so? Said Sir Tristram. Now know that thou art the man in the world that I most hate. Therefore make thee ready, for I will do battle with thee. What is your name? Said Sir Palamedes. My name is Sir Tristram, your mortal enemy. It may be so, said Sir Palamedes, but you have done overmuch for me this day, that I should fight with you. Moreover, it will be no honour for you to have to do with me, for you are fresh and I am wounded. Therefore, if you will needs have to do with me, assign me a day, and I shall meet you without fail. You say well, said Sir Tristram. Now I assign you to meet me in the meadow by the river of Camelot, where Merlin sets a monument. So they were agreed, and took their ways diverse. Sir Tristram passed through a great forest into a plain, till he came to a priory, and there he reposed him with the good man 6 days. Then departed Sir Tristram, and rode straight into Camelot to the monument of Merlin, and there he looked about him for Sir Palamedes. And he perceived a seemly knight who came riding against him all in white, with a covered shield. When he came nigh Sir Tristram said aloud, Welcome, Sir Knight, and well and truly have you kept your promise. Then they made ready their shields and spears, and came together with all the might of their horses, so fiercely, that both the horses and the knights fell to the earth. And as soon as they might, they quitted their horses, and struck together with bright swords as men of might, and each wounded the other wonderfully sore, so that the blood ran out upon the grass. Thus they fought for the space of 4 hours, and never one would speak to the other one word. Then at last spake the White Knight, and said, Sir, thou fightest wonderful well, as ever I saw knight. Therefore, if it please you, tell me your name. Why dost thou ask my name? Said Sir Tristram. Art thou not Sir Palamedes? No, fair knight, said he, I am Sir Launcelot of the Lake. Alas, said Sir Tristram, what have I done? For you are the man of the world that I love best. Fair knight, said Sir Launcelot, tell me your name. Truly, said he, my name is Sir Tristram de Lyonesse. Alas, alas, said Sir Launcelot, what adventure has befallen me? And therewith Sir Launcelot kneeled down and yielded him up his sword, and Sir Tristram kneeled down and yielded him up his sword, and so either gave other the degree. And then they both went to the stone, and sat them down upon it, and took off their helms, and each kissed the other 100 times. And then anon they rode toward Camelot, and on the way they met with Sir Gawain and Sir Gaheris, that had made promise to Arthur never to come again to the court till they had brought Sir Tristram with them. Return again, said Sir Launcelot, for your quest is done, for I have met with Sir Tristram. Lo, here he is in his own person. Then was Sir Gawain glad, and said to Sir Tristram, You are welcome. With this came King Arthur, and when he wist there was Sir Tristram, he ran unto him, and took him by the hand, and said, Sir Tristram, you are as welcome as any knight that ever came to this court. Then Sir Tristram told the king how he came thither for to have had to do with Sir Palamedes, and how he had rescued him from Sir Breuse Saunce Pité and the 9 knights. Then King Arthur took Sir Tristram by the hand and went to the Table Round, and Queen Guinevere came, and many ladies with her, and all the ladies said with one voice, Welcome, Sir Tristram. Welcome, said the knights. Welcome, said Arthur, for one of the best of knights, and the gentlest of the world, and the man of most worship, for of all manner of hunting thou bearest the prize, and of all measures of blowing thou art the beginning, and of all the terms of hunting and hawking you are the inventor, and of all instruments of music you are the best skilled. Therefore, gentle knight, said Arthur, you are welcome to this court. And then King Arthur made Sir Tristram knight of the Table Round, with great nobley and feasting as can be thought. Sir Tristram as a sportsman. Tristram is often alluded to by the romancers as the great authority and model in all matters relating to the chase. In the Fiery Queen, Tristram, in answer to the inquiries of Sir Calidore, informs him of his name and parentage, and concludes, All which my days I have not lewdly spent, nor spilled the blossom of my tender years in idlesse, but as was convenient have trained been with many noble fairs, in gentle thieves and such like seemly leers, mongst which my most delight has always been to hunt the salvage chase amongst my peers, of all the tranges in the forest green, of which none is to me unknown that yet was seen. Ne is there hawk which mantless on the perch, whether high towering or accosting low, but I the measure of her flight do search, and all her prey, and all her diet know. Such be our joys which in these forests grow. End of chapter 14. The Age of Chivalry, Chapter 15, from Bulfinch, The Age of Chivalry. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Age of Chivalry by Thomas Bulfinch, Chapter 15, The Round Table. The famous enchanter, Merlin, had exerted all his skill in fabricating the Round Table. Of the seats which surrounded it he had constructed 13, in memory of the 13 Apostles. 12 of these seats only could be occupied, and they only by knights of the highest fame. The 13th represented the seat of the traitor Judas. It remained always empty. It was called the Perilous Seat, ever since a rash and haughty Saracen knight had dared to place himself in it, when the earth opened and swallowed him up. In our great hall there stood a vacant chair, fashioned by Merlin ere he passed away, and carven with strange figures, and in and out the figures like a serpent ran a scroll of letters in a tongue no man could read, and Merlin called it the Siege Perilous, perilous for good and ill. For there, he said, no man could sit, but he should lose himself, the Holy Grail. A magic power wrote upon each seat the name of the knight who was entitled to sit in it. No one could succeed to a vacant seat unless he surpassed in valor and glorious deeds the knight who had occupied it before him. Without this qualification he would be violently repelled by a hidden force. Thus proof was made of all those who presented themselves to replace any companions of the order who had fallen. One of the principal seats, that of Moraunt of Ireland, had been vacant 10 years, and his name still remained over it ever since the time when that distinguished champion fell beneath the sword of Sir Tristram. Arthur now took Tristram by the hand and led him to that seat. Immediately the most melodious sounds were heard, and exquisite perfumes filled the place. The name of Moraunt disappeared, and that of Tristram blazed forth in light. The rare modesty of Tristram had now to be subjected to a severe task, for the clerks charged with the duty of preserving the annals of the Round Table attended, and he was required by the law of his order to declare what feats of arms he had accomplished to entitle him to take that seat. This ceremony being ended, Tristram received the congratulations of all his companions. Sir Lancelot and Guinevere took the occasion to speak to him of the fair Isode, and to express their wish that some happy chance might bring her to the kingdom of Loegria. While Tristram was thus honoured and caressed at the court of King Arthur, the most gloomy and malignant jealousy harassed the soul of Mark. He could not look upon Isode without remembering that she loved Tristram, and the good fortune of his nephew goaded him to thoughts of vengeance. He at last resolved to go disguised into the kingdom of Loegria, attack Tristram by stealth, and put him to death. He took with him 2 knights brought up in his court, who he thought were devoted to him, and, not willing to leave Isode behind, named 2 of her maidens to attend her, together with her faithful Brengwain, and made them accompany him. Having arrived in the neighbourhood of Camelot, Mark imparted his plan to his 2 knights, but they rejected it with horror; nay, more, they declared that they would no longer remain in his service, and left him, giving him reason to suppose that they should repair to the court to accuse him before Arthur. It was necessary for Mark to meet and rebut their accusation, so, leaving Isode in an abbey, he pursued his way alone to Camelot. Mark had not ridden far when he encountered a party of knights of Arthur's court, and would have avoided them, for he knew their habit of challenging to a just every stranger knight whom they met. But it was too late; they had seen his armour and recognized him as a Cornish knight, and at once resolved to have some sport with him. It happened they had with them Daguenet, King Arthur's fool, who, though deformed and weak of body, was not wanting in courage. The knights, as Mark approached, laid their plan that Daguenet should personate Sir Lancelot of the Lake, and challenge the Cornish knight. They equipped him in armour belonging to one of their number who was ill, and sent him forward to the crossroad to defy the strange knight. Mark, who saw that his antagonist was by no means formidable in appearance, was not disinclined to the combat; but when the dwarf rode towards him, calling out that he was Sir Lancelot of the Lake, his fears prevailed; he put spurs to his horse, and rode away at full speed, pursued by the shouts and laughter of the party. Meanwhile Isode, remaining at the abbey with her faithful Brengwain, found her only amusement in walking occasionally in a forest adjoining the abbey. There, on the brink of a fountain girdled with trees, she thought of her love, and sometimes joined her voice and her harp in lays reviving the memory of its pains or pleasures. One day the caitiff knight, Bruce the Pitiless, heard her voice, concealed himself, and drew near. She sang: "Sweet silence, shadowy bower, and verdant lair, you court my troubled spirit to repose, whilst I, such dear remembrance rises there, awaken every echo with my woes. Within these woods, by nature's hand arrayed, a fountain springs, and feeds 1,000 flowers. Ah, how my groans do all its murmurs aid! How my sad eyes do swell it with their showers! What doth my knight the while? To him is given a double need. In love and arms emprise, him the Round Table elevates to heaven. Tristram, ah me, he hears not Isoude's cries. Breuse the Pitiless, who like most other caitiffs had felt the weight of Tristram's arm, and hated him accordingly, at hearing his name breathed forth by the beautiful songstress, impelled by a double impulse, rushed forth from his concealment and laid hands on his victim. Isoude fainted, and Brengwain filled the air with her shrieks. Breuse carried Isoude to the place where he had left his horse, but the animal had got away from his bridle, and was at some distance. He was obliged to lay down his fair burden, and go in pursuit of his horse. Just then a knight came up, drawn by the cries of Brengwain, and demanded the cause of her distress. She could not speak, but pointed to her mistress lying insensible on the ground. Breuse had by this time returned, and the cries of Brengwain, renewed at seeing him, sufficiently showed the stranger the cause of the distress. Tristram spurred his horse towards Breuse, who, not unprepared, ran to the encounter. Breuse was unhorsed, and lay motionless, pretending to be dead. But when the stranger knight left him to attend to the distressed damsels, he mounted his horse and made his escape. The knight now approached Isoude, gently raised her head, drew aside the golden hair which covered her countenance, gazed thereon for an instant, uttered a cry, and fell back insensible. Brengwain came. Her cares soon restored her mistress to life, and they then turned their attention to the fallen warrior. They raised his visor, and discovered the countenance of Sir Tristram. Isoude threw herself on the body of her lover, and bedewed his face with her tears. Their warmth revived the knight, and Tristram on awaking found himself in the arms of his dear Isoude. It was the law of the Round Table that each night after his admission should pass the next 10 days in quest of adventures, during which time his companions might meet him in disguised armour and try their strength with him. Tristram had now been out 7 days, and in that time had encountered many of the best knights of the Round Table, and acquitted himself with honour. During the remaining 3 days, Isoude remained at the abbey, under his protection, and then set out with her maidens, escorted by Sir Tristram, to rejoin King Mark at the court of Camelot. This happy journey was one of the brightest epochs in the lives of Tristram and Isoude. He celebrated it by a lay upon the harp in a peculiar measure, to which the French give the name of triolet. With fair Isoude and with love, ah, how sweet the life I lead! How blessed for ever thus to rove, with fair Isoude and with love! As she wills, I live and move, and cloudless days to days succeed. With fair Isoude and with love, ah, how sweet the life is led! Journeying on from break of day, feel you not fatigued, my fair? Yon green turf invites to play, journeying on from day to day. Ah, let us to that shade away, were it but to slumber there. Journeying on from break of day, feel you not fatigued, my fair? They arrived at Camelot, where St. Lancelot received them most cordially. Isoude was introduced to King Arthur and Queen Guenever, who welcomed her as a sister. As King Mark was held in arrest under the accusation of the 2 Cornish knights, Queen Isoude could not rejoin her husband, and Sir Lancelot placed his castle of La Joyeuse Garde at the disposal of his friends, who there took up their abode. King Mark, who found himself obliged to confess the truth of the charge against him, or to clear himself by combat with his accusers, preferred the former, and King Arthur, as his crime had not been perpetrated, remitted the penalty, only enjoining upon him, under pain of his signal displeasure, to lay aside all thoughts of vengeance against his nephew. In the presence of the king and his court, all parties were formally reconciled. Mark and his queen departed for their home, and Tristram remained at Arthur's court. Chapter 15